Zach, now I got one that I wanted to talk to you about, and that is a Mr. Caelen Carson, and that is a Mr. Eric Scott Jr. So with Eric Scott, I thought that it was really interesting hearing Wanye Thomas say, a few second-year guys that can play. And one of the players that he named was Eric Scott, but it wasn't the way that he named him. It wasn't that he just named Eric Scott. It was how confident he named him. And in how he said, listen, Eric Scott, a lot of people don't know this, but Eric Scott can play. And so I actually do remember scouting him. Well, first of all, I didn't know the name before he was drafted, and then he gets drafted, and you're like, Eric Scott, why do they like him? And then everybody remembers the story when he FaceTimed in himself working out or sent in a video of him working out. And he actually started off hit this process last year, OTAs and everything, really hot.
Yes.
And then the NFL caught him. I mean, obviously went to Southern Miss, smaller school, but he actually has the tools to do some of the things that the Cowboys want to do.
Yeah.
And then now you enter in Caelon Carson, who I think realistically Scott fit more for Dan Quinn's scheme because press man all game, that's what you want to do. Whereas Carson, you've actually seen him play some off man. He really trusts himself because he's a great tackler. He's done a lot of cover two things. Do you see a potential battle brewing? Because I think the Cowboys want to let both of these guys have an opportunity in a crack at being cornerback 4.
Yeah, you mentioned it. One's a Zimmer guy, the other one's a Dan Quinn guy, right?
Yeah.
And that does matter. And people forget that because like coaches have their guys, you know, especially when they draft. And the Cowboys invested, I believe it was this year, a 6th round pick in 2024 in Eric Scott to get back up and draft him. Maybe it was a 5th. I don't remember what it was, but they invested heavily in him, but that was in a Dan Quinn scheme.
Yes.
So I do see, you know, a camp battle. Did you have Carson as a 3rd or 4th rounder? I felt like that was about where he was.
I had a 3-4 on Carson. I did not watch a lick of Eric Scott film. Okay. And I won't be fake. I did not watch any Eric Scott film.
Interesting to see how that works with Mike Zimmer and what he's asking the corners to do. And like you said, Eric Scott Jr., more of a press man. Caelon Carson is really good off the line, pulling the trigger, getting downhill, tackling, very physical out there on the edge.
You know, one thing to keep in mind when it comes to these corners is you could just have an injury like what happened with Trevon Diggs.
Yep.
And then the Cowboys have been sneaky good. Anthony Brown, Deron Bland, with hitting later in the draft and finding, dare I say, lockdown corners. I mean, to get an Deron Bland, who is not only a lockdown corner, but like historically good corner.
Yeah.
It's just like, wow. So that's why this topic is so important, because the truth of the matter is one of these guys could come in here and be a star and kick Deron Bland back inside to where I think that's his more natural position.
And these picks will sneak up on you. Deron Bland was a 5th round pick. Jordan Lewis gets injured in that Detroit game. Bland comes in. I believe he had 5 interceptions in his rookie season. It sneaks up, and next thing you know, you're like, oh, we trust Deron Bland. He's starting in 2023. You know, and it could be the same way with Carson. Obviously, wish injury on anybody, but if something were to happen, Carson comes in. Next thing you know, you feel comfortable with him in 2025, and he's a cornerstone piece now. So these picks will sneak up on you.
And I think it's the right. So I say this. And I mean this, part of it is that the Cowboys, it's the right way to approach the cornerback position. Yes, you have your guys who are your studs, but I don't think you ever want to get to a position, Zach, where, and this isn't a knock on Philly, where you're forced to draft a position. And if you think about it that way, the Cowboys nailed this draft. They weren't forced to draft a left tackle. I could have gave you 4 different positions that could have went first round. The end, which, you know, Darius Robinson Jr. apparently was in high consideration for the Cowboys. Could have went DN, could have went corner, could have went receiver, all in that first round. Went tackle because they weren't forced to, but the best player fell to them and they played the numbers game. Shout out to the analytics department, playing the numbers game and still being able to now parlay that with who? With Cooper Beebe. But then Caelon Carson falls, where I think that this cornerback class was poo-pooed on. Didn't have the quite elite guys. Quinyon Mitchell obviously made the jump late to being not the late. He went through the whole process being good, and he's now a Philadelphia Eagle. But he did everything he was supposed to do. But he was like the premier guy.
Yeah.
But even Terry and Arnold, the Lions are forced to trade with us for Arnold. Well, all Dallas does is say, well, wait a minute. This guy's sitting here in the 5th round. The Cowboys say, wait a minute. This guy's sitting here in the 5th round. I know everybody wants running back, but I can promise you this. Caelon Carson is going to give you more value than any running back, especially if he hits. So now you have Eric Scott, who, if nothing more, him or Carson could be a great depth piece. If you do end up with the injury, I just think that this is a battle that we want to watch for nothing else. The back half of the roster being good.
It's something that you can get in trouble real quick with the cornerback room. We saw it in 2022 going into the playoffs. Dallas rolled out, what was that guy's name, in week 17, and Sam Howell lit him up. They ended up cutting him.
Oh, that was I can't think of his name. It wasn't a special teamer, CJ Goodwin, but I know exactly who you're talking about.
You remember though that the corner room was struggling. It was struggling. It's definitely something to watch, and it matters a lot, especially between Scott, Carson, and then even, I mean, you still have Nashawn Wright on the roster as well.
Yeah, man. That was a struggle, and it was so crazy. You remember what we talked about? That was so crazy because Zach, what did I lead with? Being forced to draft a position. They went Nashawn Wright, they went Kelvin Joseph. Neither one of those guys panned out. They hit on DaRon Bland. So sometimes it just works out that way. If you keep just drafting good players at certain times, I think that's how you kind of want to do things. So I'm excited. I'm really excited to see how those two battle.
Me too.
Peace.